Imagine you turn on Jeopardy and there's only two players. There were supposed to be three, but one of them couldn't find a babysitter, so we're just trying it with two tonight. How would that change the game? Well, first, you're going to hear this sound more often.
That white membrane comes over the eyes. They don't want to see what they're eating. They're like me. Go again.
Every player has things they don't know, things they do know, and things they think they know, and some of these things overlap with the other players, and some of these things overlap with the kinds of general knowledge questions they do on Jeopardy! So if red and blue don't know what a compact disc is, yellow can jump in. But if yellow's not there,
It eats only freshwater snails, but it doesn't eat them with garlic.
this is especially true because Jeopardy punishes failure and rewards success. It's lousy with feedback loops. Right answers not only give you more money, but give you control of the board, so you can play to your strengths. And more money and control of the board better positions you to take advantage of daily doubles, increasing your lead.
19,000.
Hello. Here's the clue.
Philip? What is Vancouver?
Yes.
Jeopardy is prone to runaway leaders. If you're losing, it gets harder and harder to recover. And that kind of thing just feels worse at two, not just for the players, but for the audience. Like all game shows, Jeopardy is designed first and foremost to be watched. Three players is also what gives bidding strategy its juice, what makes it watchable.
And your wager was nothing, I see.
For example, this is a mistake. David is in last place, but he's not far behind Regina, so he knows that she's incentivized to bid big, both to outpace him and to try to overtake Brad. Regina's best bet is to go all in, and Brad needs to bid appropriately to outpace her. That's assuming both of them get the question right. David can only win if A, both of them get it wrong, and B, both of them make large bids. If those bids reduce their scores below 4,900, and David's score hasn't gone down either because he got it right or because he bid zero, he wins. Except if Brad bids exactly $2,401, which is all he needs to do to more than double Regina's best possible score, and Brad gets the question wrong, he still ends up with $5,399, which is more than David's 4,900. There's no incentive for Brad to go bigger. David misread this. This is like the only actually interesting part of Jeopardy, and it's only interesting because there's three players. In this case, it's a moot point anyway because they all got it right.
And his wager, 2,401, taking him to 10,201, and he becomes the new champ.
So two-player Jeopardy obviously doesn't work, but that's okay. We found a babysitter for that third contestant for tomorrow night. So everything's going to be fine. In fact, I have a couple friends in town, and they really like games. Can they come along? Can we try Jeopardy at 5? I'm sure that won't be an absolute disaster. Baseball is played with two teams of 9. There are exactly 2 people in a boxing match, 2 people in a wrestling match. Wait, why is there a third guy? What's he doing with that chair? Oh no! Chess is for 2. Jeopardy, as we've seen, is for 3. Bridge is for 4 players, but only 3 of them get to play? Bridge is a weird game.
Chico's response of 2 clubs is artificial, of course, and requests partner to show a 4-card major suit.
These games are designed for a specific fixed number of players, and if you change that number, the game breaks. It changes the dynamic, the balance, the texture, even the nature of the thing. With a board game, however, if you can play it at 4, you can probably play it at 3 or at 2, maybe even at 1. There's an expectation with modern board games that they work for or are adapted to a wide range of player counts. That's unique and interesting.
It's over, Coach. Let's work. We've only got 4 players. What are we gonna do?
For about as long as we've been playing games, humans have wanted to play a game but not had the right number of players. And so we get creative. For example, backgammon and cribbage are games for 2 players, but people came up with variant rules so they can play with 3 or more. Now, we don't really think of these as games that scale in the same way as, say, a modern Euro game, and there's a couple reasons for this. First, almost all these games I've been talking about are competitive games. That is, they're games that are played competitively in tournament or professional settings. And because in that setting we're measuring and rewarding skill, things have to be fair and standardized. There will be regulations and restrictions.
Right! Ain't no rules that the dog can't play basketball.
A modern game like Root seats 1 to 4, but if you're entering a Root tournament, every match is going to have the same number of players because otherwise it's not fair. For example, the possibility of a dominance victory gives the game so much of its competitive juice. Is very much a factor when you're playing a 4-player game. But those cards just aren't in the deck at 2. When we think of our oldest board games, games that go back hundreds and thousands of years, we tend to think about 2-player games that are played competitively. Now, this just might be survivorship bias. In order to still be played and thought about in the 21st century, someone had to take them seriously, and one of the ways we do that is we play them professionally for money and write books about how they're a mind sport. But there's also a noticeable shift in the kinds of games that are invented starting in the 19th century. In wealthy nations, the upper and middle classes suddenly find themselves with a great deal of leisure time. And how do you fill all that leisure time? They don't doom scroll or share memes. 19th century memes are terrible. I'm spring heeled to jorkin it. And by it, well, let's just say my ankles. Let's just say tuberculosis. One thing they might do is have some friends over. Parlor games like charades or 20 questions become popular, partially because you can play them with however many people showed up, and partially because they're not particularly vicious games. They pass the time pleasantly, they don't kill the buzz of the party.
You guys really embarrassed me in front of Howie.
Another thing these people do is read. The demand for popular, accessible fiction skyrockets. Or they might play piano or sing, so there's a demand for new songs. And sheet music basically starts what we think of as the commercial music industry. Or they might play a board game. And this is where those games shift from being a folk object, hand-carved or made by artisans, to being mass-produced and manufactured. And with mass production in a capitalist society, there comes an incentive to sell as many as possible. And the wider the range of players the game can support, the more likely someone is to buy it.
It's pretty important, but it's hard to disentangle that as a personal preference and a commercial preference. Because one thing about doing games the way I do them now is there are 17 families that are being supported by them. So we have to make sure that they're going to be commercially viable. But that's also kind of like a cheap answer, and I'm not happy with it, because actually it is important as a player that games scale. Because the sorts of games that I work on, I want players to play a lot. I want them to like really sit with it for a long time and play it in different contexts. And those contexts could be, you know, in the evening and in the morning, or it could be with 3 at the table and with 5 at the table, because all of those elements change the kind of the timbre of the game.
Wait, that word's pronounced timbre?
Timbre. Timbre.
Huh.
Player scaling also has to do with like access. So many games are played with either 2 players, usually as a couple, or as a set of couples. It is like the most common setting in board games that exists is 2 couples playing together. What the 4 to 5 player jump usually looks like in practice is we have a couples game night and then another person comes to join us. And if the game can grow just a little bit to like open them into that world, then suddenly it's getting access to a whole another group of players, and having flexible player counts like allows that door to widen a little bit. It comes at a cost too, because you lose the ability to have a very bespoke setting. You also, it demands more from the actual design, because the design that can adapt to from 3 to 4 and then to go from 4 to 5 has to be just considerably more resilient, and that resiliency takes time and makes for sometimes pretty steep compromises in terms of the nature of the game.
I ran into this problem when I was working on Nicaea. The central idea just fell apart when I had fewer than 4 players, and having at least 4 players is a pretty big ask. One solution was to make special rules or an automa. Another would be to just throw out that central idea.
Pretty steep compromises in terms of the nature of the game.
Instead, I just left it. It's a game for 4 to 6. So I understand why these compromises are necessary. I just usually refuse to make them. And that's not like artistic vision on my part. I'm so iconoclastic. It's that I have that luxury, the luxury of not seeing it as a problem to be solved. Because my games don't need to support and feed and house 17 families. If they did, it would be grossly irresponsible to make something like Nicaea or something like Westphalia, which you can play with 6 and only 6. Not to mention, it would be financially ruinous to mass produce a game like that. But my games are print on demand, so I have the luxury of getting weird with it. And there is an audience, however small, that has an appetite for weird. An appetite that historically has been underserved. And so that's kind of my niche. I cater to that. You know, you're not going to get Westphalia to the table every week. You're probably not going to get to the table every year. But when you do, you're going to have an experience you can't get anywhere else. And that's the kind of thing people want from me, and that's the kind of thing I try to provide. But that too has a cost. If games with flexible player counts have to be more resilient, games with more fixed counts are less likely to be.
So I played 2 games of Westphalia at UKG. There are things in that game that are really wonderful, and there are things that like don't work. And we had a group where every once in a while we would find like a hole, like a ledge. We're like, ooh, don't do this, because if you do this, the game will stop working. Let's just stay on the trail. Yeah. And it reminded me how important like charitable listening, viewing, and playing is, where you're like, what is this game about? Are we going to agree to like have the game remain about these things?
I talked about this kind of thing in Rules as Play, how Catan falls apart if you play it very cutthroat, or how the old SBI Lord of the Rings game doesn't work if you're playing it as a competitive game instead of as a narrative experience. It's not just about following the rules, it's about playing in the spirit of the game, otherwise it ceases to function. Speaking of functioning, let's consider the fact that games with dynamic or very elastic game states are balanced by their players. Poor play not only damages your position, but can warp or distort the experience for the whole table. Especially very asymmetric games are more likely to demand all players be equally matched to maintain that balance. The final bid in Jeopardy not only needs 3 players to be entertaining and suspenseful, but it needs 3 players who are good at Jeopardy.
No, that too is incorrect. And what did it cost you? Everything. What is Atlanta? The president in question in the clue is Bill Clinton. The correct response is Little Rock, Arkansas. Let's see what Mike lost. 13,800. We have 3 players finishing with no money. So, sorry folks, see you tomorrow.
If the scores are too lopsided going into it, or only one person makes it to Final Jeopardy, it's pretty flat.
Kristen, we're going to start with you. You were in 3rd place and in the lead. All right, let's take a look and see what you wrote down.
There are highs and lows. Jeopardy is all over the place from one night to the next. Resilient games, on the other hand, are often more tightly bounded, more consistently pleasurable. If you play Great Western Trail badly, you're not going to turn it into a slog for the other people at your table. Whereas if you screw up in, say, Container, you've ruined it for everyone. And it is especially fragile at lower player counts. The box says 3 to 5, but I've never heard anyone say anything good about it at 3. I know some people who consider it to only be a 5-player game, but if you were to put exactly 5 players on the box, who's going to buy that? And if you change the game so it scales more effectively, there's the danger that you're going to lose the things that make it what it is. But what makes a game what it is? What makes Container, Container? What makes Root, Root? One useful framework is that each game will ask a question or pose a problem. For example, many Euro games ask you about being efficient. They ask you to construct a series of turns, of actions that will move you towards your goal while making the best use of various bonuses. And these games usually scale quite well across many different player counts. The ways you answer the question the game poses and the nuances of how that question is phrased might change. But whether you're playing at 2 or 4, you're having the same conversation.
It's a little bit like, I'm increasingly finding myself using like theatrical motifs to describe game design. And it is the difference between a scene built for 3 characters and a scene built for 5 sometimes. Like they're in the same play. It's the same action, but different types of relationships are possible. And that isn't true for all games. I mean, I love it as a player when I encounter a game that can only be played at a very specific count.
Train games like Chicago Express ask you to create and navigate an overlapping series of partnerships to incentivize other players to pursue goals that will benefit you. You can't really do that when there's just 2 of you. Fundamentally, it's a question that needs 3 or more players to function. Cribbage asks you to read the other person, to set traps for them, and to avoid theirs. That question isn't asked by the various solitaire versions, which use the same scoring and counting rules. Cribbage and Cribbage are not really the same game, in much the same way GoldenEye and GoldenEye are not the same game. They might run on the same engine, but they are asking such different questions. Or, as my partner pointed out to me the other day, it's not like the single-player Call of Duty lets you summon Cornholio to kick the T-800 in the nuts. When changing the player count changes the questions being asked this much, it's not like they're scenes within the same play. It's more like, am I past a 1-minute advertiser threshold?
A little bit, yeah.
Great. It's more like sex. When you're doing it by yourself, it's different than when there are 2 of you, or 3, or 4, or 9. The mechanics might be roughly the same, but the experience is going to be different, and it's going to ask different questions depending on the number of people. Questions that are specific to that number.
The political games that I work on have kind of division problems at their heart. Like with Oath, you're always dividing between Imperial players and non-Imperial players. So when you are playing a game of Oath with 3 players, well, it's either going to be 2 versus 1 or 1 versus 2. And when by the time you get to a 5-player game, you can go 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3, and you just kind of run the different combinations of it. With Pamir, you're always dividing the number into 3. So some people actually really like playing Pamir with 3 players because it means that they always have like a home faction. You could always isolate your own position. But other folks love it for 4 because there's always going to be 1 player out.
A lot of the games I'm working on right now are like high player counts, and I think it's because they're all very social games, very like interactive.
So I'm actually the publisher of 2 of Zoe's games, Velociraptor and Persuasion, which are discussed in this interview. So I benefit financially from interest in those games. So I have to disclose that, Also, Zoe is a producer of these videos on Patreon. In fact, it was the first person to be a producer for these videos. So I want to just make sure you're not jump scared when its name shows up at the end. While I'm at it, I did publish a game by Cole Wehrle and one by Erin Escobedo, who, spoiler alert, appears later in this video. But both those games have been out of print for several years, so there's no financial relationship there for me to disclose.
A lot of the games I'm working on right now are like high player counts, and I think it's because they're all very social games, very like interactive. Your relationship with the other players matters a lot more. So when something's happening with your like potential ally, then that's like very relevant to you.
With multiplayer games, the more players you have around the table, the stronger the herd is. So it actually shuts down the more like wonderful combos and strategies, the riskier, stranger, more articulated positions, because there are more players who are able to shut down that play. Whereas at low player counts, there's less possibility for a table to police itself. And so you can get away with really divergent, interesting plays that are like filled with liabilities. This is one of the biggest differences between Pax Premier at 3 players versus 5 players.
The consensus on BGG is that Chicago Express is best at 4, because that gives you more control over the game state. I like it best at 6, and I think I'm the only person who does. For most people, it's too chaotic. But for me, the more players you have, the more ways your position can get hopelessly entangled with more of the other players. And that's really rich and fascinating. That's what I want from a multiplayer game.
In those moments when you're waiting for other people to do stuff, you're still like very engaged in what's happening or what's going on with the other players. Like in Persuasion, in a very direct way, you're very concerned about what cards other players have. So when somebody's cards get switched up, you're paying attention to whose cards got changed, and is somebody now a better match for me, and stuff like that. You're very much engaged in the other players.
In RPGs, because we're so obsessed with the idea of the conversation, right? There's the thing that Vincent Baker says that everyone kind of repeats a lot, which is that the game is the conversation, right? That in an RPG, overwhelmingly the actual game occurring is not in any play materials, but are in the words being exchanged by the players at the table. I think for me, the value of a game is oftentimes in being in conversation with other players. The GM in RPGs, I think, like, by virtue of changing the dynamic from being 5 players to being 4 and 1 players, right? That kind of, where it's like, you know, there's 4 people who are playing one game and then a 5th person who's kind of doing a different thing. That creates really different number configurations, and also having that one person operate this kind of continuous facilitator role and be adjusting the game on the fly means that you can get a lot more flexible player counts, because the game isn't as fixed as a toy.
So the 2 of your games that I've encountered the most both go up to 8 players. Why 8? That's a unusual player count.
For Velociraptor, I specifically increased the player count of that game to 8 because it was originally designed for 2 to 4 players. But in my testing, like, people were having a really good time at 4, and they were envisioning like it being even better with more. And so I increased the number of cards and the player count to 8, and they were right. Like, the experience was like much more fun at 8 players. Feels a little bit more like a party game where like the points don't matter, and there's a lot of goofiness going on.
In the board game world, right, like there's a certain threshold, probably like 6 or 7, where it becomes like a party game.
Party games are comedy games. I can't think of a single one that isn't at least trying to be funny. And part of this is, you know, it's a party. You want to have a good time. You don't want to bring people down. But I think it also has to do with being built for higher player counts. With more players, each player inherently has less personal control over the game state, and that chaos can create surprises and a space for emergent comedy.
I appreciate that these are both like positive reinforcement.
Excellent.
Also, jokes land better when you're not the only one laughing. There's a reason why comedy films are improved with an audience or a group of friends. Walk Hard was a lot funnier when I saw it in the theater than when I tried to watch it alone at home.
It was a particularly bad case of somebody being cut in half. I was not able to reattach the top half of his body to the bottom half of his body.
Speak English, Doc. We ain't scientists.
Conversely, the horror film The Witch was much better at home, much more effective, because when I saw it in the theater, a lot of the people around me started laughing when the witch ground up the baby into ointment. I think they were embarrassed by how blunt and direct it was. They just kept cackling throughout at all this horrific stuff going on, and it made it difficult for me to give my attention to the film. Certain types of emotional experiences require buy-in from the audience, require vulnerability. Laughing doesn't demand that. In fact, laughing at something protects you from having to be vulnerable. You add enough players into the mix for all these reasons we've discussed, it's going to trend toward farce anyway, so if you're designing with higher counts in mind, you should make a farce.
Where you're like, what is this game about? Are we going to agree to like have the game remain about these things?
Once you get above a certain number of players, it becomes really unlikely they're going to agree on what the game is about or how it should be played. It's like almost impossible once you're at 6 or 8 players, let alone 10 or 20 or 60.
My background comes from LARP, and the LARP that I would do was specifically like 60 to 100 teenagers. The thing about designing for a lot of players, like once you cross a certain threshold, you're not designing one game. You're designing a space where games are happening, which is almost a different process, right? When you're designing a game for 30 people, those 30 people are not all playing the 100% game. It's the 100% same game. Some of them are playing maybe like a more intense game, some of them are playing a more laid-back game. They're all doing different things in that same space. You're building an environment with lots of different opportunities for different kinds of games. And sometimes those will be really big group games, like, oh, we're gonna have a mass battle, right? That's a game with 30 people in it. But then also you might have a thing where like 2 characters have a pensive conversation. Is that a 2-player game? I remember there was a LARP I played where there was one player sitting alone and he spent the entire time sitting alone and singing. And sometimes people would walk up and compliment his singing, but he just kind of sat there and sung. And like, is that a solo game, right? Like, is that a 1-player game? Or is that like a group game because everyone was hearing the music, they were engaging with it, right? Like, what was happening?
Do you miss working with LARPs at all, or?
I miss the larger scale and I miss the physical embodiment. I think there's something very special about being able to build a thing that can have a quasi-religious experience, right? That I could take you and I could grab you by the shoulders and bring you out into the woods and change your life, right? And like, that is a thing that I can do with LARP that I can't do with tabletop or other forms of design. And so I miss that element of it, of being able to be like, hey, I'm gonna make a magic spell in the woods and it'll work.
Externally accessible. Right?
Yeah, then you can slide out, yeah. Alright. And obviously like Hive, you can't break into separate sections of things.
Yeah, you have to keep it one.
Yeah.
2-player games are kind of a special thing though. They're just totally different. It's like a completely different branch of game design. A lot of the games that are really successful at large player counts are just like profoundly ill-equipped to work with 2 players. I think that's certainly true for my own games. Like Oath, I would never play with just 2 players, even though the game supports it. I just don't think it's that interesting.
2-player games are so vulnerable. They're so intimate. I've done 2-player games that feel like having sex, right? Like, it's just like, it's so like we're both in the same space doing a thing. Like in person especially, it feels very exposing.
That is the thing that fascinates me most in this life. The infinities locked unreachably behind other people's skulls. And it's 2-player games I've always felt gave me the most direct and intimate and thorough access to a part of someone. It's not necessarily the deepest part of another person. Value prioritization, how they react to things, how they move under pressure. These are things you don't really get to see in like people you know, people close to you. And two-player games specifically, they feel like, if they're done well, they feel like that deep conversation, me to you. I say something, you advance an argument that you've thought of. I bring my thing to the table, you bring your thing to the table, we react, we respond, we learn about each other, we have a dialectic. And that's the greatest thing ever. Not necessarily the games in and of themselves, but that connection with another person. And that's what I love in games, and that's what I love in two-player games.
Have you played The Mind, Amabel? This was a very popular game at conventions a few years ago.
This one with the cards 1 through 100.
Yes.
Okay, yes, I've played
And
it.
it's one of those games that people get very upset about it because they think it might not actually be a game. And they're like, well, why don't players count? And I'm like, you've clearly never been in a band. You've clearly never had to quietly count to 100 next to someone and seeing if you could line yourself up. The thing about The Mind, I mean, it's very simple. You have a hand of random numbers. You have to play them in order without communicating with the rest of the table. And it's sort of about developing an emergent temporality with the table the people you're with. And when you play it with 4 players, it's very percussive. Like there's like you're trying to find this like shared beat. When you play it with 2 players, it is outrageously intimate because you're just looking at someone's eyes for sometimes just long periods of time without saying anything. And the highs and lows of that experience are really incredible. Like I have seen when people beat The Mind with 2, like they just have a good long hug. It's sort of an amazing moment.
I don't see much daylight between the cooperative experience Cole is describing and the kind of competitive conversation that Erin is talking about. Because when you're playing a 2-player game, you're not really playing a game against someone, but with them. And there is a degree where it's less about the game and more about me and you.
That's one of my tiles?
Yeah. Am I not allowed to move you?
You only move your tiles or the neutral tile.
You
I did say
did
that.
not say
I
that.
did say that.
Why must you lie? On camera.
I'm not lying.
I see the trick because you didn't record the rules explanation. Just the mise-en-scene and tell me which director.
I mean, it really depends if this is a static overhead shot. Oh yeah, try Quiz Show. Yeah. Okay, what were the other frames for it?
I haven't seen Quiz Show in some time.
I would have gotten that.
Yeah, about...
What? You tell me to keep up. I try to keep up. And you're like, Amabel. And it's not the good kind of Amabel. That's the bad kind.
I am dying in a bush on purpose. We traversed several screens in order to get to, Oh no! I tried to be clever and throw my sword ahead of me and it did not work. It's not cringe. But I am saying, fuck you, I win!
Okay.
I love fighting games because the element of time they bring into it creates an earnestness and passionate energy to that conversation I'm looking for, because when you have like infinite time to think of your response, you can compose yourself in the most like the way I wish to be seen. So if we're sitting down for chess and you have, you know, we're not on a timer, you have time to think about your move, you have time to think about every little part of it. When you're in a fighting game, there is a response that is you, that you have trained, that is particular to the person you are playing, that because it comes so fast, you have to make a choice. You get the choices that they just go to, the first thing on their brain, what they've prepped. They can only really do complex things if they've studied it beforehand. What you get in this moment is who they are unvarnished, and that is electric.
I'm also a big fan of fighting games. My favorite is Tekken, which is also Samhain's favorite. She introduced me to it, so we play it together sometimes.
What if I shoot you several times with a fucking gun?
I don't feel like that's fair.
Did you forget to bring, like, a knife?
I did. I did forget to bring a knife.
You did not know we were allowed to have a knife.
One thing you might not realize if you don't play fighting games is that they are deterministic. A punch will always have the same speed, the same range, the same damage. If we play 2 matches and we do the same moves in the same order with the same timing, it will have the same result. Granted, that's a pretty big if when the controller is reading inputs every 1/60th of a second. This temporal element, the simultaneous nature of the game, and their overall complexity means that for all their determinism, fighting games don't feel deterministic. Tekken doesn't feel like chess, which is good because Samhain generally dislikes deterministic combinatorial perfect information games. They're too easy for her to predict and to solve.
Any available move with that piece, the other neutral piece, and then you put it on top of the stack of neutral pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the game's over.
Okay.
And the game was over like 6 moves ago.
She told me once that what she needs from games are baffles, things that prevent her from fully calculating the game state. This could be a little bit of randomness gumming up the works, or something that's complex enough that it can't be solved by a human brain. So while we play a lot of board games at 2, we don't actually play that many games designed specifically for 2.
I'm trying to think about why are 2-player games fundamentally different. Well, it has. I mean, you're just dealing with combinatorial game theory. It's like, they're all boiling down into these like very chess-like encounters.
Now, there's a whole class of 2-player games we haven't talked about yet at all, and those are war games. Whether you're lining up your cute little dolls on the table, or you're playing with cardboard squares, like an adult, these are games with a healthy amount of randomness, usually in service of flavor or simulation value. Designing one of these games, you have 2 goals in mind. One is to create a competitive, balanced game, and the other is to create a model. And these 2 goals are often in tension, and how that tension is resolved depends on the design, depends on the designer, depends on the audience it's being pitched towards. James Dunnigan, founder of SPI, definitely leaned more heavily towards simulation. He once said war games are, to a very large extent, a means of conducting historical experiments.
Hold on, one of the lines is missing.
So another player just gets in the way most times. Oh, that's right. War games that are designed for 2 players are usually played without an opponent. Dunnigan cites survey results from the 1990s, showing that over 60% of war gamers just play both sides themselves, often preferring to do so because that way the player may exercise their own ideas about how either side in the game should be played without interference from another player. And that's interesting. Here's a list of the 10 best-selling games that I publish. 6 of them are solo games. 3 others are 2-player games, but a lot of folks play them without an opponent, one player playing both sides. And absolutely, this impacts how I design 2-player games. I tend to avoid things that would make solo play difficult. But maybe this is splitting hairs. I don't design solo modes or bots for my 2-player games because in those games, the other person is the point.
2-player games specifically, they feel like, if they're done well, they feel like that deep conversation, me to you.
Following a process, a bot can also follow a process. And it can you can have a little bit of game state read. But things that are messy, or that involve negotiation, or that involve kind of fleeting moments of king-making and betrayal, a bot can never do that because a bot doesn't know how to play you emotionally, and vice versa. It doesn't have feelings. It can't have a feelings-based experience. It work because I now work for Leader Games, which I've really enjoyed. Actually, I'm talking to you on my 1-year work anniversary. I started my job exactly 1 year ago.
Has it been a year already? Wow.
Isn't that shocking?
Yeah.
But for Leader Games, right now, the project that I'm trying to wrap up but you know how things go with trying to wrap things up, is Oath. So I worked on that with Richard Wilkins, aka Ricky Royal, and we have like a twofold solo mode for this game. One is a bot that acts like a player to the greatest extent that a bot can. The other is a cooperative mode that I'm trying to do kind of late stage development on right now, called the Queen of Shadows. The Servant solo mode is bound by the need to feel like a person because of what it is. Like, you're supposed to be able to throw it in as an extra player, or if you're playing by yourself, it replaces human players at the table. And so it has to behave in a way that fits the vibe, but it also can't think. And Oath is a game with a bunch of different like victory conditions and shifting things, and you know, you're never going to get the negotiation aspect out of a bot. You're never going to get like kind of the table talk and like the alliances that form and fall apart out of a bot. And so in that sense, like, I already go into this project, right, knowing that I'm never going to create a full what it feels like to play competitive Oath experience. What I can do, right, is, you know, Ricky and I can make a bot and test it extensively so that it feels Oathy.
I was interviewed by a journalist who's been writing professionally about board games for years, and he asked me why I design solo games. Don't I worry that they're not going to sell? Do I have to find ways to make them more attractive to customers, to sell them on the idea that they should play a solo game? And these questions just don't map onto reality at all. I mean, if we're talking just financial incentives, I should only be designing solo games. But those questions are reflective of an attitude that I see a lot in certain segments of the hobby market. This idea that solo games are this weird thing that go against the entire point of board games.
I really enjoy... This sounds terrible. I enjoy the selfishness of solo gaming because I get to play what I want to play, when I want to play it, for as long as I want to play it. And so when I'm feeling exploratory or I want to look at games and think about them, I can have my own process through solo gaming. And I really have come to appreciate that just the way that I would appreciate like reading a book or something.
My impression of TTRPGs is that they're very social, they're group activities.
Yes, solo RPGs are a really new phenomena, and they're weird. Like, there was debate if they are RPGs for a bit, and they've settled in as, like, these are RPGs also, but solo RPGs are definitely, like, they are a separate category. They're considered to be a very different thing. Overwhelmingly, the actual game occurring is not in any play materials, but are in the words being exchanged by the players at the table. Right, a solo game is, by that definition, very weird, right? Because a solo game is not a conversation with other players. It's a conversation with yourself and the game object, which is really normal in board games. I think that's what most board games are, but in RPGs is really weird.
That kind of self-conversation with the game object also occurs in video games. Board games and TTRPGs are overwhelmingly normatively multiplayer. But the reverse is true for video games. The norm is for the vast majority of them to be single-player experiences. Many of the games that people take seriously, or that resonate with them emotionally, are single-player games. They are better equipped than multiplayer ones to tell stories and explore themes. Like we talked about before, games with higher player counts tend toward comedy. But when you're alone, it's easier to be open, easier to be vulnerable.
I think that solo games have a wider scope for upsetting themes, in particular, or things that I can sit there and really think about. I know that there are people who disagree with me, right? But something like endurance, I don't want to play that with somebody else. I think that the point of something like endurance is to be alone and feel like cold and by yourself. And so I think solo games are really good for having kind of meditative experiences.
That game that Liz mentioned, Endurance, is one of mine. It's about the Shackleton expedition. It's a very grim game about suffering and survival. I think it's a hopeful game, but it's also miserable. Another solo game of mine, But Then She Came Back, is about taking care of someone who is abusing you, being trapped in this relationship. Over the course of the game, you will cut off pieces of your own body to stop her from hurting you. And I'm comfortable making these games for people who are up for having those experiences, but I would be horrified if someone played it who wasn't. And if these were multiplayer games, that absolutely would happen. Like, people play games they don't really care for all the time. Samhain really likes introducing people to Castell, and I don't really like it, but I can tolerate it to play it with a group of people. I knew going in she wasn't going to like High Tide as much as I do, but I also know it's not going to give her trauma to play it with me this one time. Some of my two-player games have very heavy subject matter, things that could be emotionally difficult to engage with. Often one of the two sides represents a form of systemic oppression, and asking someone to embody that is a pretty big ask. So I make sure those games can be played solo, because you should only be engaging with this if you want to. City of Six Moons is a solo game for kind of the same reason. It doesn't have heavy or upsetting subject matter, but it is a game that you have to translate before you can play it, and probably the first several times you're going to play it wrong and trying to figure out how it works. And there are people who are going to be really into that, and others who find it obnoxious. And I just don't want to subject people to that. I don't want someone to bring this to game night and get a bunch of people together to get annoyed at it, right? But I've been surprised, actually, how many people play this solo game together. Whether they're comparing notes online, or getting together with work friends on their lunch break, or just a couple playing it side by side, it's a reminder that even solo games have a social element. They're about connection, and there is a sense of community. That's true for all games, regardless of player count. The thing I was really struck by in all these conversations I've had with all these other designers is how much they focus on making something for other people, making a thing for strangers to enjoy. And in that sense, player count and scaling isn't really a commercial consideration so much as it is a human one.
I find that I want to make sure it scales down lower just because there's times where you just don't have that many people to play with. There's a lot of times when my play group only has like 3 or 4 people, and it would be nice to still be able to play these games. And although it's less than ideal, it's like still some way you could sort of experience the game if you don't have like a bigger crowd to work with.
Like, I already go into this project, right, knowing that I'm never going to create a full what it feels like to play competitive Oath experience. What I can do, right, is, Ricky and I can make a bot and test it extensively so that it feels Oathy.
Player scaling also has to do with access. Like, different game groups have sometimes really rigid player requirements.
It's made me realize that I've been kind of stubborn about how I approach player counts, making games for exactly 6 players or 4 to 6. And maybe I should approach it a bit differently, even within my weird niche. I've been thinking about it a lot because I spent most of the last year working on a licensed game, adapting a series of books into a board game. I can't actually tell you what the book series is yet. I won't be able to say it until like 3 days after this video comes out, which is pretty frustrating. But I'm making this game based on these books that I love and that a lot of other people love. And I made a game for 3 to 4 players that asks questions that I like at 3 to 4. But there are people who are going to buy this just because they love this thing or have it bought for them as a gift, who might not be gamers or have a group of 3 to 4 people. And I want them to be able to enjoy this. I want to make this thing for them. So I've made some of those compromises that I've traditionally resisted, and I found a way to scale this down so it works for 2. Is it my favorite count, 2 players? Probably not. But it might be theirs, and they're the ones who matter.